Okay, so today we're going to start with an introduction to teleological arguments. Now, teleological arguments, they are arguments for the existence of God based upon observation and very specific observation. So, an argument, remember, is something that is meant to convince you with logic and observations and truth claims. So the only way we can respond to them is also with arguments. It's these teleological arguments are arguments for the existence of God. They are themselves attempts at proof of the existence of God based on observation of a very particular thing. Observation. So these are a posteriori on observation of specifically purpose. So a particular point towards something. And some also are based on complexity. So in other words, it's based on a particular feature of the world. So it's an argument for the existence of God based on observation of purpose and complexity. Right, we need to go through some definitions to fully understand what we're talking about. So teleological, we've talked about this before. Telos is specifically is purpose related. Okay. So something has a particular end, a reason. These are also a posteriori arguments, so they are based on observation. They are empirical. So you can't quite use the word empirical and a posteriori interchangeably, but you can almost do so. So they are empirical. They're also inductive. These are inductive as opposed to deductive arguments. Remember, deductive arguments are where if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. These are rather probabilistic proofs. Like history and science are also inductive arguments. So are these teleological arguments. Okay, I just want to start by giving you a little bit of context. The context really here is Aristotle. Now, you remember that Aristotle thought that everything in the universe has some sort of purpose, like the eye is for seeing, the chair here is for sitting, but everything, not just man-made things, but all things have a purpose. Okay. Now, if they all have a purpose, he says, and they are the sum total of the universe, then the universe itself must also have a purpose. This idea of a telos very much comes from Aristotle, but then it was taken on into kind of the Christian church as a really kind of good way of proving the existence of God. That, by the way, is meant to be an arrow, a very bad arrow. So the Christian church, the church over here, uses Aquinas' teleological thinking to attempt to prove the existence of God. And that is really where these kinds of arguments start. They don't finish there, however, and we'll see how this thinking develops as we go on. So there are two kind of main arguments we're going to look at. One is Aquinas's over here, and Aquinas takes a very similar argument to that of Aristotle. Paley takes a very different view of things, and we're going to cover that a little bit. But both of them think that they can prove through the observation of purpose and complexity the existence of God. Okay. So let's just start with Aquinas briefly. Aquinas notes that unintelligent things like rocks, atoms, well, not atoms specifically. I don't think he believed in atoms, but unintelligent things like rocks and trees and mountains and tectonic plates and so on. Again, tectonic plates is before his time. All of these things, they have a telos. Now, he says, one second, things that we know that have a purpose, that aim towards a particular thing, have intelligence, right? Like this archer firing an arrow. Here is the arrow. Another poorly drawn arrow. Two in one lesson. Excellent. Firing an arrow towards a particular target, right? In order for him to do that, of course, he must be intelligent. So a telos, says Aquinas, requires intelligence. Because you need to know where the target is. You need to have an idea of the target. So if the world is made up of these kind of unintelligent things that have a telos, and having a telos requires an intelligence, well then these unintelligent things must be guided by an intelligence. Specifically, God. Okay? So that is essentially Aquinas' argument. He says, look, the world is such that the only explanation is that God exists, based upon this teleological thinking. Now, Aquinas is writing in the 13th century, so he's writing in the 1200s, really, a very, very long time ago, bringing us slightly more up to date, though this is still kind of at the early stages of the scientific revolution. This is pre-Darwin, for example. Paley presents us with a different kind of argument. He thinks that the world isn't teleological in this way. Instead, it's mechanistic. Everything is just cause and effect and chance, essentially, and nothing else. But, he says, there appears to be a difference between some sorts of things and other sorts of things. He's not looking at the whole world. He instead looks specifically at biology. He gives us an analogy. He says, look, if I'm walking across a heath and I see a watch, and this watch stands out to me. Why does it stand out to me? Well, it stands out to me because it is complex. And it also has a telos. It has a very specific telos. Unlike here, where the telos is broad and about the whole of nature, for Paley, the telos is specific. The telos specifically here for the watch is to tell the time, right? Well, that must mean that this stuff is designed. Then Paley says, well, you know, that here, the complex and telos is the design test for design. I can apply that to biology. Biology also has specific purposes. So, for instance, the eye here, or what we might call a triangle. The eye over here, this has a very specific purpose, he thinks. The purpose is, of course, to see. And so it has a purpose. It's telos is sight. And it also is complex. It has many working parts. And so, of course, in the same way as the watch must be designed, says Paley, biology must be designed. So those are two examples of teleological arguments. We're going to go through those in a lot more detail. And we're also going to look at criticisms of those.